I hope you'll stay with us. Most of it, all of it is compelling. Very compelling. The Manafort case wound up. But I want to discuss specifically pulling the security clearance for John Brennan. The question I have is, how did John Brennan ever become a CIA director? How did he ever become a CIA director? Now, we've talked at length about John Brennan in 1976 or 1980 or both. He voted for Gus Hall for president. Gus Hall was the boss of the Communist Party USA for decades. He and the CPUSA were funded, in part, by the Soviets. Now, this was at the height of the Cold War. Brennan votes for him. The CPUSA was committed to overthrowing the United States. I am asking you how anybody with that kind of temperament and judgment, or lack thereof, could be CIA director. He was old enough to know better. It was the height of the Cold War, and he votes for the Stalinist, Gus Hall. And he's proud of it. He's proud of it. Brennan has yet to answer for his role in spreading the Hillary Clinton DNC Russia dossier that began the phony Russia collusion investigation against President Trump in the first place. And he apparently used Harry Reid and maybe other Democrats to spread the dossier to the public and press it with the FBI. Does that sound like the proper conduct of a CIA director in the middle of a campaign? Brennan doesn't need a security clearance to defame and smear the President of the United States on left-wing news shows. He's saying his First Amendment rights and his right to free speech are suppressed. And, of course, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner, runs to his defense and says these are Nixon tactics with enemies lists. How bizarre. If you're the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, shouldn't you be worried about this? But I guess not, because at one point, Dianne Feinstein was the chairwoman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and she's been playing footsie with the communist Chinese for decades, as has her husband, Bloom, and, of course, as we now know, her longtime staffer and driver of 2 decades was a communist Chinese spy. What kind of clearance does she have? Top level of the FBI. Look at the top level of the FBI. It's wiped out. The top level of the FBI is wiped out due to all kinds of misconduct. We've never seen anything like this in our country. James Comey was fired. And whether Rosenstein backtracks or not, it was on his recommendation, at least in part. Comey was a leaker. He removed government documents when he left office. McCabe is under criminal investigation for leaks and cover-ups. He was condemned by the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. Peter Strzok was just fired for his misconduct and political attacks on the president, while the top counter-espionage investigator at the FBI. James Clapper lied to Senator Ron Wyden, left-wing kook Democrat of Oregon, about the NSA's eavesdropping program on the American citizenry. That's perjury. And he was later forced to apologize. But I want to remind you about something else with John Brennan. John Brennan lied when he publicly insisted that the CIA had not illegally accessed the computers of Senate Intelligence Committee staff. The CIA accessed the computers of Senate Intelligence Committee staff, Mr. Warner. He publicly denied it. He denied it to Congress. He said it would be outrageous if the CIA did it, knowing all along that they did do it. And he was later forced to apologize, an apology of sorts, to Senate Intelligence Committee senators. Can you imagine what a loose cannon this man is? What a disaster he is. The issue isn't why his security clearance has been pulled. The issue is why he ever had a security clearance in the first place. Now, the media, of course, come to Mr. Brennan's defense, which suggests to me that he's a leaker. Now, I don't know this firsthand, but they defend him. If Mr. Brennan had been a Republican doing these things, they would have compared him to J. Edgar Hoover. But not now. No. Now he's the greatest CIA director we ever had. He is a nasty man. He's a loose cannon. He's unstable with the things that he says about Trump. He doesn't need a security clearance to be a kook. Now, Sarah Huckabee Sanders at the White House briefing today announced the decision to yank John Brennan's clearance. And by the way, a clearance is a privilege. It's not a right. It doesn't come with your retirement pension when you're in the federal government. I don't know why they leave office with it anyway. Why does John Brennan need a security clearance? Here's Sarah Huckabee Sanders today. Cut one, go.
I'd like to begin by reading a statement from the President. As the head of the executive branch and commander-in-chief, I have a unique constitutional responsibility to protect the nation's classified information, including by controlling access to it. Today, in fulfilling that responsibility, I've decided to revoke the security clearance of John Brennan, former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Historically, former heads of intelligence and law enforcement agencies have been allowed to retain access to classified information after their government service so that they can consult with their successors regarding matters about which they may have special insights and as a professional courtesy. Neither of these justifications supports Mr. Brennan's continued access to classified information. First, at this point in my administration, any benefits that senior officials might glean from consultations with Mr. Brennan are now outweighed by the risks posed by his erratic conduct and behavior. Second, that conduct and behavior has tested and far exceeded the limits of any professional courtesy that may have been due to him. Mr. Brennan has a history that calls into question his objectivity and credibility.
Exactly. And that's thoroughly correct. Absolutely correct. She said more. Cut two, go.
Such access is particularly inappropriate when former officials have transitioned into highly partisan positions and seek to use real or perceived access to sensitive information to validate their political attacks. Any access granted to our nation's secrets should be in furtherance of national, not personal interest. For this reason, I've also begun to review the more general question of the access to classified information by government officials. As part of this review, I am evaluating action with respect to the following individuals: James Clapper, James Comey, Michael Hayden, Sally Yates, Susan Rice, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and Bruce Orr. Security clearances for those who still have them may be revoked, and those who have already lost their security clearance may not be able to have it reinstated.
Outstanding. There may be more, by the way. We haven't gotten to the bottom of everything at the FBI and the DOJ. These people don't deserve security clearances. They've been sleazing around, snaking around in the shadows, playing politics, partisan politics. And some of them who've gone public have made outrageous statements. Outrageous statements. And I might add, that serve the purposes of the Russians and serve the purposes of the Chinese and the North Koreans and the Iranians and others as they try to undermine the commander-in-chief. Now, they're free to do these things. Don't get me wrong. They're free to say whatever they want. But they don't have a right to a security clearance when they leave the government. And the president gets to decide that anyway. It's not as if the president is pardoning a bunch of terrorists like Bill Clinton did with the Puerto Rican terrorists. Remember that? No. or giving a pardon to a tax fraudster billionaire like Mark Rich. No, he's not doing any of that. He's just saying, you know what? I revoke this privilege. Just because Obama gave it to you doesn't mean I have to continue to tolerate this. And he's right. It's not an enemies list. They're still free to speak. Nothing's being done to them. They can go out and peddle their skills, whatever that might mean. But immediately, the media jump into action. Immediately. Oh, my Lord, this is Nixonian. Oh, we have enemies lists. Oh, you're just doing this to get back at people. You notice how the media love these people because the media have been working with them, you see. The media, as a collective, is such a fraud in this country. Oh, we defend free speech. You don't defend free speech. Nobody's attacking free speech. You can yap all you want. These corporations that own these media outlets, nobody's threatening them. They are using free speech to advance an agenda, and they're being called out on it. Now, what did the media types have to say at the press conference today at the White House? Well, when we come back, you get to hear some of it. We'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
So John Carl, ABC News, all these guys and gals are so predictable and so dim-witted. Here's a question for Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Cut 3, go.
It seems like everybody that you mentioned has been a political critic of the president. You see going after his political opponents with this?
No, if there were others that weren't, that we deemed necessary, we would certainly take a look and review those as well.
Now, the president is reacting to the conduct of these individuals. Men and women who've had the highest security clearances, access to the most important secrets in this country, who've turned their former positions into political positions where they go in public and attack the commander-in-chief. They are free to attack the commander-in-chief. They're free to say everything they've been saying. It's not a First Amendment or free speech issue. They are not free to have security clearances. That's a privilege. That is a privilege. The issue for me when it comes to John Brennan, as I've said before, is how the hell did this guy get a security clearance in the first place? How do you vote for a Soviet communist, a Stalinist in this country, and get a security clearance to run the CIA? Every one of these individuals has a reason to lose the privilege of a security clearance having been retired or forced from office. Comey, leakers who take government documents ought not get a security clearance or retain it. McCabe, under criminal investigation for leaks and cover-ups and lying, he's condemned by the Inspector General. He ought not be able to retain his security clearance. Peter Strzok speaks for himself. He shouldn't be able to retain his security clearance. James Clapper lied about the massive NSA eavesdropping program under oath, which is perjury. He was never charged. He was forced to apologize. Why should he retain? Why would he keep it in the first place? Bruce Orr, Sally Yates. And by the way, we still haven't gotten to this unmasking issue. We still don't know who did what. We still don't know who did what. There is no reason any of these people should retain their security clearance. Politics aside, we're talking about their conduct. We're talking about their behavior. We're talking about what they've become since they've left office, and some of them while they were in office. Jeff Mason, whoever the hell that is, at the White House briefing today. Here he is. Cut 4, go.
How is this announcement by the president, how can Americans not interpret that as a getting back against his critics? And isn't it also an attempt to curtail their freedom of speech by penalizing them for being critical on television?
Once again, how does this penalize their freedom of speech unless We all get security clearances. Do we all have a right to a security clearance? Is it a right? And again, I would ask these reporters, are you not familiar with what Comey did? Are you not familiar that McCabe is under criminal investigation? Are you not familiar that Peter Strzok was just fired for misconduct? Are you not familiar about James Clapper's perjury? Are you not familiar with any of this? Why are you saying the president going after his political opponents? Maybe they're his political opponents, maybe they're not. But they've all conducted themselves in ways that, of course, they shouldn't retain the highest classification of and access to security information. This is preposterous. Go ahead.
The president has a constitutional responsibility to protect classified information and who has access to it. And that's what he's doing, is fulfilling that responsibility in this action. This is actually only specific to Mr. Brennan, and the others are currently under review.
Is this the kind of precedent he wants to set for future presidents when his administration is out of office? And why are there no Republicans on that list?
Well, hold on a second. Mr. Producer, isn't Comey a Republican? Did he not say, why are there no Republicans on this list? There's at least one Republican on the list, but that doesn't matter. You see how the media come to the defense of the miscreants and the malcontents, because they hate Trump, no matter what he does. These people are losing their security clearances post-employment because of their conduct. Comey was fired, and among those who recommended it was Rosenstein. He was a leaker, and he absconded with government documents. McCabe is under criminal investigation. Strzok was fired for his dishonesty and his bias. And I can go on and on. So the question for Mr. Mason is, why do you pretend to be a reporter? Why are you such a hack?